r/NoSleep. Posted by u/Darkheroxx. Whispers beneath the cracks. Imagine, you're at home going about your regular daily life until the whole world starts shaking violently. A low rumble can be heard as your dishes and furniture start clattering around you. You're trying to keep your bearings, but you collapse onto the floor while everything around you is crashing onto the ground. Your heart drops as you hear a crack and a boom, the ground caves in and you begin to fall. As quickly as it began, you're covered in the remains of your home and the weight is slowly crushing you. There's nothing you can do to prevent a natural disaster. All you have to do is try to survive, but the worst part is the aftermath. After everything is done, you're left with the literal pieces of your life scattered everywhere. It's truly horrifying, with the damage, the confusion, not knowing if any of your loved ones are safe. My name is Luis and this happened in a small city I lived in. We were suddenly struck with a massive earthquake. I'll never forget the booms I heard when buildings started to collapse. This story starts a few hours after the earthquake, when everything had finally settled. I was fortunate enough to make it through without any incident, but I couldn't say the same for others. I volunteered to be a part of a group to go around and just help out as much as we can. I had spent a few years as a volunteer firefighter, so I've had a bit of training in case things like this were to happen. Time was of the essence, so we moved out as quickly as possible to find any survivors. Our group had gone out to a small apartment that had collapsed nearby. When we got there, it was just utterly destroyed. There was a head count and a few people from the building weren't accounted for, a woman named Alejandra and her daughter Carla, an older man named William, and a young man in his 20s named Rigo. As I walked up to the debris, I was shocked. I couldn't imagine anyone surviving this, but I didn't want to lose hope. Me and a few other guys, Miguel and Julio, started to lift the bits of rubble. We were doing this for a few hours and started to lose hope, and it was getting late into the night. We were exhausted and it was time for us to return to the others to report what we'd found. But I didn't want to move. I just sat there and stared at the remains of the building. The guys had already left, but there were 4 people here that needed help. I refused to brush them off as dead. There was so much rubble, my hands ached as I lifted more and more bits of building away. I must have seemed like a madman digging so desperately in the middle of the night, but there were lives in danger here. They were still alive, right? I imagined the bodies crushed and bloodied underneath all of this, and I started to feel sick to my stomach. I paused for a moment to catch my breath and resist the urge to vomit. The street was quiet. What was once a bustling road was now a deserted, broken landscape. It's so crazy to think this all happened in an instant, so much destruction, so fast. That's when I thought I heard something in between my breaths. It was so faint I could barely hear it. I held my breath and focused my hearing. It was crying, a little voice crying. "Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?" I shouted. I frantically lifted more and more of the broken pieces of the apartment and I yelled again. "Hey! I can hear you. Don't worry, I'm gonna get you out." As I dug deeper and deeper, I could finally hear her voice. It was faint and weak, but I could hear her call out to me. "Hello? Is someone out there?" My heart dropped. I held back the tears that were welling up in my eyes and I yelled out, "It's okay. It's okay, little one. I'm trying my best to get to you." I took a flashlight and shined it into a small crevice. The voice sounded like a little girl's. "It must be Carla. Where's your mom?" I asked. There was a moment of silence before she finally responded, "I don't know where she is. Everything started to shake and I don't know how I got here." I took out my phone and called Julio to tell him that I found someone. A few minutes later he came with a few other guys in his Jeep. We shined a brighter light into the cracks and sure enough we saw small eyes looking back at us. We all began to dig more and more. We started to gather a crowd and more people joined us in our efforts to get this little girl out. We were able to get to a point where we could see her hands. She was only a few yards away until... Hold on, we need to stop." Julio spoke. I couldn't believe what he was saying until he explained the situation. We had to tread carefully at this point. With the positioning of some of the pieces of the building, it could make things much worse. It could even kill her. So he said he would request some aid and get some bigger equipment to help. But in the meantime she would have to stay there for a few more hours at least. I could hear her cries and it stabbed at my heart. I couldn't leave her here, so I told everyone to get some rest while I stayed with her. I sat close to the opening we had made and peered into the darkness. I could barely make out her features. She looked around 10 years old with long black hair and olive skin. The events of that day finally began to take its toll on me as my body began to ache as I stretched and groaned. I heard Carla giggle. It echoed through the crevice. I peered inside and grinned. "Hey, what's so funny?" I joked. I was glad to hear her laugh instead of crying. It must mean she's gaining hope. "Nothing, thank you for helping me," she said softly. "Hey, just a couple of more hours and we'll get you out of there, okay?" I reassured her. We sat there in silence for a moment. I breathed in deeply, trying to fight the urge to fall asleep, until she asked me a question. "What's your name, sir?" "Oh, my name's Luis." I shook off the fatigue to answer her. "I'm really scared, Uncle Luis," she whispered. That wrenched my heart, so I peered back into the crack and called out to her. "Hey! Don't worry. I'm staying right here, okay? I won't leave you," I told her. "Thank you." She sounded like she was going to cry again. "I just want to see my mom." Carla's mom was reported missing with her, and I assumed she would have been in the apartment. Where was her mother? I prayed that she wasn't in the rubble. I prayed that she was alive. I couldn't do much for her, so I tried my best to keep her calm. So I offered a bit of small talk. We talked about our favorite foods, our favorite subjects in school, stuff like that. "Why are you helping me?" she suddenly asked. I didn't hesitate in my response and told her. "Because you're in trouble," as simple as that, Carla. She began to laugh a little bit, but it sounded wrong. For a moment it frightened me. For a split second it didn't sound like a little girl. She whispered to me, "Don't lie." It was cold, the words ran down my spine. I'm not lying. I'm only here to help." My response got stuck in my throat for a bit. "How old are you, Luis?" she asked, her voice was almost like a growl. Before I could answer she shouted, 28? "No, 29. "Right, how did you?" My voice trailed off as I saw her eyes inside the darkness, the faint light of the moon reflected off of them, making them shine wide. "You expect me to reward you for helping me?" she hissed. "A poor helpless girl for you to play with?" No. What the hell?" I screamed at her. "What is wrong with you? I can hear you, I can see you, you're hiding something." Her voice was so loud, but it wasn't coming from her, it was echoing inside my skull. "Carla, get some sleep, it's been a long day," I cried out. "What are you hiding?" Her question was burning in my mind. "What's your secret?" My ears were ringing, my head started to throb, and my chest was tightening. The reason I'm doing this and the reason I'm trying to help this little girl is because I killed my sister, I cried out. The memories of that day flashed before me as if I was sitting front row in a theater. She was my little sister, Vanessa. She was only 8 years old at the time, and I was around 10 when we were playing at the park near our home. We were playing hide and seek until a man came up to us and started asking us some questions. The man asked us how old we were young and didn't know any better, so we answered him. I didn't realize he wasn't paying attention to me, he was staring right at Vanessa. We were playing as he watched us, and I got a bit too rough when I tagged her. She tumbled onto the ground and scraped her knee really badly. The man quickly shot up and told me he was going to get her patched up, so he picked her up and told me to wait right there. Vanessa was crying so much, I didn't know what else to do, so I told the man that it was okay for him to take her. I was only 10 years old, as I sat on that park bench for hours. I waited for so long, but the man never returned with my sister. When my parents found me, I was sitting there, crying. When the police asked me what had happened, I was sitting there, crying. When weeks had passed and no one could find any sign of her, I was just sitting there, crying. I've spent my whole life cursing myself for letting that man take my sister. I've hated myself so much that I thought that saving Carla would somehow redeem me. I could hear her laugh again, but it didn't sound like she was alone. Her laugh erupted into dozens and dozens of distorted laughter, all in unison. I wanted to run away, but my knees were shaking. I just sat there and listened to that horrible noise. I forced myself to cry out, "No. I know I can't change anything, but I can save you now." But my shout was drowned by that disgusting laughter. I slammed my forehead onto the ground and felt blood run down onto the dirt below me. I felt the ground rumble as everything started to shake around me. The laughter shifted to a loud mechanical roar, and I shot my head up to see large construction equipment and floodlights. Miguel and Julio had returned with more people and the aid of some construction workers. We shone some more light into the darkness, and we could see a young girl with long brown hair reaching out to us. Slowly, and ever so carefully, we were able to remove the remaining debris to reveal a body. We all stood there in shock to find the crushed remains of an older man in his late 50s. He fit the description of the man William who was also reported missing. We were completely floored. We had heard the voice of a little girl. We looked in there and we swear we all saw a little girl in there. Right? I talked to her. I thought I talked to her. Everything around me started to spin. I remembered talking to Carla. I thought it was her. Apparently I had passed out right then and there. A couple of hours later I finally came to and was surrounded by the other guys. Not only that, the police were there too, questioning everyone. When my turn finally came around, I told them everything that had happened that day, the digging, seeing Carla, then digging up that old man's body. The officer had a grim look on his face and I asked him what was wrong. He looked at me for a moment with hesitation, then finally told me. William was a registered sex offender. He was also suspected of a few girls going missing and they were keeping a close eye on him. Apparently during the chaos he had tried to save his mementos. In his pocket were pictures of little girls he had. He had reassured me that Carla and her mother were not even in the apartment at the time, they were completely safe and sound. A few days later it was on the news about William and he was indeed responsible for the cases of missing little girls. The police actually touched back with me, they broke some really horrifying news. One of the pictures had a girl that fit the description of my little sister, and sure enough, it was. After all these years I finally found Vanessa,